myself. There's going to be a whole little series of short videos. So we're moving from adolescence into adulthood. So my first question is, does the brain stop changing when you reach adulthood? No, I see lots of no's. Excellent. So never fear, even after you finish your 20, well, after you finish SAGEP, your brain is still going to change. And he looked at two very specific things that resulted in changes to the brain. And part of those changes can affect yourself, of course. So in one set of changes in adults, he looked at changes that happen in adulthood that involve kind of intentional use of your brain for, or intentional activities that you're doing, and how those activities cause a certain area of your brain to be used over and over again, and that results in changes. And then he looked at a medical condition that caused damage or change to the brain that resulted in changes to someone's personality with Charles Whitman. So I'm going to begin with the taxi driver study, the knowledge, which again, it's a presentation choice if you want to present on that. It's a very cool study where they have these taxi drivers in London, and these taxi drivers have to memorize the map of London, which is a huge and complicated place. How long do they spend studying routes and maps for this? Yell it out, Susan.
4 years.
4 years. 4 years. They spend 3 to 4 years studying maps and places and reviewing routes in their minds that they could take. Now, one area of the brain in particular is sort of dedicated to dealing with spatial relationships and stuff. What part of the brain is that, Brenda?
The posterior hippocampus.
The posterior hippocampus. In fact, it's even more specific than that. If anyone does that article, you'll find out that the posterior hippocampus is only part of the story. But yeah, the posterior hippocampus. So I'll write that down, posterior hippocampus. I hope I've spelled that correctly. This part of the brain is used for spatial memory, spatial recognition. And as you use this, what was observed in these taxi drivers who spent 4 years memorizing the streets of London? Vrinda?
I think it grew for the people that were studying it, and it reshaped their brain anatomy.
Yeah, their brain anatomy changed. The posterior hippocampus got larger. Now, what he doesn't talk about, or what further studies have revealed, is that the growth of one area is kind of at the expense of another area of the brain. Like the brain only can grow so large. So as one area develops, another has to decline in use. So, and it's always kind of like a zero-sum game. You give a little here, you lose a little there at something else. But based on intentional choices, parts of your brain will be developed. So the more time you spend doing something, the better your brain gets at that particular task, more efficient. Sort of I think it's actually the gray matter increases in that area of the brain. So it's almost like, even though you don't get more cells, it's like the cells increase in size, I guess, or more cells get set for that task. Because the brain it's not like your internal organs where it's like a discrete, the hippocampus is not like a heart where there's like a boundary around it. It's like this gray, it's an area in the whole of the brain that is considered the hippocampus. And there's an area of the brain that's considered the prefrontal cortex, for example. It's all like squishy brain cells connecting to each other, but it's not like you can necessarily yank out a complete, encased in its own sort of sac area, the way like a heart or a lung is in the brain. But the brain anatomy does change. What are some other things that can change your brain anatomy that are very intentionally choices that you make? And he mentioned a few. Rachel.
Learning to play an instrument, and that can also make learning a new language easier.
Yeah, so learning to play an instrument makes language learning and memorization easier. Albert Einstein, from using his left hand to play the violin so much, that affected the part of his brain responsible for the use of his fingers of his left hand. So everything you're doing Well, like if you spend your time studying linear algebra, that part of your brain's getting stronger. If you spend your time playing The Witcher 3 on your PlayStation, that part of your brain is getting stronger. So remember, every choice you make, everything you do is impacting your brain's ability. If you want to pay attention to stuff, pay more attention to stuff. So that's kind of interesting, I think. The other thing that he talked about was the Charles Whitman. And Charles Whitman shot a bunch of people from a clock tower at the University of Texas at Austin. But it was very surprising because there was no indication that this person was going to do this, right? He was a bank teller, a student, he had been an Eagle Scout, he had been in the military. Like there was nothing about him that was suggestive that this person was going to kill his wife, his mother, and then a bunch of people. So when he died, they did an autopsy. And what did they find about Charles Whitman in particular? Omar?
He had a brain tumor
He had a brain, where was his brain tumor?
in the hippocampus.
It wasn't in the hippocampus, it was in another part. Vanessa?
I didn't quite get it, but I think the amygdala.
Amygdala. So I wrote that down, the amygdala. So the amygdala is the part of your brain that deals with fear and aggression. It's involved in stress response, in fact. And he had a tumor pressing against his amygdala, which was probably changing its functioning, its anatomy. Maybe it was making it function too much. So while they don't know for certain what caused him to shoot people, there's reason to believe that it was this tumor affecting the part of his brain involved in fear and aggression that eventually led to him having strange thoughts, atypical thoughts that he couldn't control, and eventually acting out violently. And we do know that brain tumors, depending on where they are in the brain, are going to influence who you are and how you are. Anyway, I'm going to continue with the video, so let's keep going. So let me just ask a few questions about memory, which I think this is quite important. It's a really like dense section that he covers there, because he does the thought experiment with Daisy, and then he talks about Elizabeth Loftus's work. And again, someone might be presenting on her work in this class, which is kind of awesome. So memory, while we might think of memory as like our memories or what makes us who we are, it's important to know that memories are not fixed, but are changed and influenced by things around us, the things we hear, the things we see, the things we're told over time. And there's a number of reasons why memories change, that they're not consistent or constant over time. So first of all, what part of the brain did he mention is related to memory? Did anyone catch that? Antonia?
The hippocampus, right?
The hippocampus is involved in creating memory. And he actually gave us kind of a definition for what a memory is. What is a memory, according to David Eagleman? Antonia remembers. Let's see if anyone on the other screen remembers. Charles, what is a memory?
The way he said it was like a past brain state. It's just like a reconstruction of how you were thinking what was happening. It's not an actual record.
So it's a brain state, I'm going to write this down, from a bygone time that must be reconstructed. So it's like your brain's electrical circuits are firing to recreate something from the past, and the hippocampus has kind of created this particular brain state. So memories are like your brain, recreates a moment from the past, but it doesn't do it faithfully. What are some reasons why the hippocampus can't recreate things exactly as they were in the past? What are some things that interfere with that? Claudia?
I think he said that a lot of the issues would arise when your present influences your past. So what your like present knowledge and how it would color your past.
So
Right.
one thing, yeah. So one thing is definitely your present knowledge, your emotions is something that reshapes the past. What else influences it? Rachel?
If you're asked leading questions,
Okay, being asked leading questions, so that may cause you to remember things in different ways. What happens to some of the neurons that were used to recreate that brain state? Vanessa?
Sorry. Yeah, like we just don't have enough neurons to be able to remember everything. So a lot of them are used for, like, a lot of the memories that we forget are then used for like more recent memories, if you will.
Yeah, so your neurons get reused for other things to recreate other memories. So there's a lot of things that influence our memories. So they're not necessarily reliable or faithful, exact replicas of what happened. The same event is remembered by us differently at different times in our life. Now, Elizabeth Loftus's work is really influential. She's been very involved in like eyewitness accounts of events. And one of her first big findings was that based on the questions people are asked, they remember information differently, which is why now if someone has been the victim of a crime, like someone who questions them about it has to be trained in not using leading information so that they try to get, so they don't influence later reports that come about what has happened. But kind of a really cool study that she did involved the shopping mall, right? So what did she do with the shopping mall story with different people? How did she test memory with the shopping mall? Go ahead, Noor.
So she grouped a false memory with real memories that the families of the volunteers had. And so that kind of made it seem like why would, like it made it seem like it was true to them and they had no reason to believe that it wasn't. So they kind of like went with it because the
Okay.
brain,
Not only did they go with it, what else did they do to the memory?
they began like adding on, but she also mentioned that they only started adding on or remembering more things from this false memory like over time, like when they started thinking about it and like had time to kind of create a scenario.
Yeah, exactly. So not only were people able to be told a memory of an event that never happened to them in life, but they added details to it over time. It became more enriched in their memory, even though it had never really happened. So you could have false memories, and Elizabeth Loftus herself, kind of experienced this as well. So memory, although we may think of, well, our memory is our record of ourselves throughout our lifetime. It's our narrative of our life. It may not be a totally accurate description of our lives and who we are, and what we remember may not be correct. So that's just worth keeping in mind. So those were two things that he went over, was sort of the study with Daisy. We're going to keep watching, so let me